What's up, everybody? We're on a podcast now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. I wanted to go back to, well, it's a classic. Of course, this is a remake of a classic, but Battle for Bikini Bottom is often looked at, and I think it's looked at by me as well as the greatest SpongeBob game of all time. Now, I have a very soft spot in my heart for, like, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. I would say the movie tie-in game, like the original, that one. I remember renting that game. I think I got stuck on that game back in the day. I remember vividly, playing one of the opening levels of that. So there's definitely some good ones. SpongeBob, has never had, I think, any unbelievably amazing ones. I mean, you maybe look back at Battle for Bikini Bottom and saying that. In terms of review scores, it's never even cracked, I think, the 70s. But of course, the difference between reviewers and consumers, or, the player base. I think the player base highly respects this game, Battle for Bikini Bottom. Now, Rehydrated, right, comes out back January 21st, 2020, so we're actually almost at 6 years. I thought it was closer to 5. It's actually closer to 6, and it's a special game. Battle for Bikini Bottom, to me, is a very special game. You probably think, I at least think, of the cover art. I mean, it is legendary, and I will say, one of the first big changes that Rehydrated makes, and I think it's overall a good game. We'll talk about the specifics as we go, but of course it's the cover. The cover kind of takes the war-bound SpongeBob and removes it, and I don't know what kind of creative decision that was, but it's so iconic. I was actually talking to a friend of mine, though, that said he remembers seeing the cover for Battle for Bikini Bottom back in the day, and then he would play it, and he was like, what the F is this? Because, it has no correlation to SpongeBob and kind of like war attire. But I don't know. I really like it. I think it's epic. I think it is iconic is probably actually the right word. It stands out. It really, when you see him in that outfit, and then the game opens up and you're just kind of going from location to location, and you are, I guess, attacking a lot of robots or defending Bikini Bottom from robots, but it's not really a military type thing, and really it is a collectathon. And in case you forgot what Battle for Bikini Bottom was and is, it has always been a collectathon of the highest order. Now, is it a good one? Yes, I actually do think it's a very good one. I think Rehydrated does its job. It modernizes it. It makes it look better. The loading screens are actually quite alarming. There's a lot of loading screens, and they take a long time. Now, maybe I need to go back into the time machine to look at some of these games of that era, because there were plenty of games that had horrible, minute-plus long loading times. But, of course, we're so used to, SSD and all that jazz, right? There's a couple things here and there. I was reading even some Reddit posts of people kind of comparing the two. The game can kind of get, I think, off the rails a little bit with, like, aiming when you're doing, like, the bubble, like the bowling throw type thing. Oh, my dear God, good luck getting that thing to go, the way that you want it to. It's a little loose in a lot of different ways, but I'll tell you, upon playing the Titans of the Tide, right, the new SpongeBob game that's coming out, I played the demo. It has such flow to it. And you look at this game, it's got a heaviness. All of these characters are like rocks. SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, they're heavy to move. And does that take away the fun? No, because I think it's a really solid platformer. There's a lot of locations. I think it's kind of the ultimate SpongeBob game for that reason, right? Like, it's got almost everybody, obviously Mr. Krabs, and I will respect this remake for keeping that. It made no sense why that happened in the first place. It'll never make sense. And you do the remake, and everybody's there, right? It's a phenomenal cast, and they're having so much fun. And Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, and you go through the entirety, really, of Bikini Bottom. You go to Rock Bottom, and you go to Kelp Forest. You go to all these iconic places, and actually far more depth in this game than some of these places ever got in the show. Okay, so you have all of that, and then you have Mr. Krabs. That's just horrible, and you never want to talk to the guy, even though you have to buy spatulas sometimes from him. So, the game obviously operates in that way, right? You're opening up, and you see the 3 iconic houses, and you start to open up places piece by piece. And I think the game has a really good kind of linear but also not linear flow to it, right? Because it's all about building up the spatulas to open up new locations. You go to those new locations, and there's a series of things you'll have to do, right? So there's socks as side things you can do, and socks still connect to spatulas, right? Because you bring the socks to Patrick. Getting all of the we'll just call them coins. I mean, that's not technically what they are, but you're accumulating money that you can give to Mr. Krabs, and he'll give you spatulas. So it's all about that, and you'll go into a location, and it'll have 10 spatulas, 8 spatulas, whatever it might be. There might be a main task to it, but generally you go through and you're just finding things. You are exploring, you're fighting, you're platforming, and there's really not much more than that. Couple times the game will break into its signature boss fights. Now so to me, right, growing up, I remember 2 things about this game. Generally, to be honest with you, I remember the cover and I remember the boss fights. They are also so iconic. The robot SpongeBob, robot Patrick, robot Sandy. They're all so cool. They really, really are. Now, upon replaying, I'll tell you, okay, like, how does it feel nowadays? Well, again, this is a remake, and it's only 6 or so years old. It holds up, I'd say, rather well. Like, I think this is a rather strong platformer. You can have a lot of fun here, and I like the way the world opens up. And I also like how deep it goes into each of these locations. There's, by the time you get to the end of it, right, like Flying Dutchman and Kelp Forest, I believe, are the last 2 kind of main locations. You need the most amount of spatulas to get in there, and then to get into that second door in the chum bucket, you need 75. So 75 is really that goal. That's what you're gunning for the entire time. And I think there's 100 spatulas in the game. Now, I started out actually very strong upon replaying it. Like, I was going for everything, and even right now, like at this point I'm recording the video, I'm pretty close to the platinum, but the cleanup, I think, of this game is a little tough. Kind of getting those last group of spatulas. I'll tell you, I'm not a huge fan of those last 2 locations. They are cool. I feel like they're kind of iconic in their own way, and I don't have a lot of memories playing those last 2 locations, like kind of the Mrs. Puff city kind of bound area. I remember that. Again, I remember the boss fights. I remember the Mermalayer and stuff, but some of those last locations were not something that maybe I didn't even make it that far, as a kid, because to be honest with you, and I realized this as I was going through the game, you really actually do have to shoot for 100%. Like, you don't need to get everything, but especially spatulas, to get to those last locations, even me as a 29-year-old grown adult right now, it took a little bit of work at the very end to get, I'll tell you this, to get from 70 to 75. That was the hardest grind of my life in this game. To get to 70, I was collecting spatulas left and right. Like, they were absolutely nothing. And it was a lot of fun. But those last 5, for whatever reason, it's like, okay, I'm not driving with these last 2 locations, so I'm not picking them up as normally as I was. And then I kind of maxed out the sock thing. Well, not, I didn't literally find all the socks, but I think I found maybe 58 socks, and it's like, I kind of maxed it in my head, where it's like, well, I would have to look up a guide, to figure out where kind of these last ones are. Money-wise, you feel like you have so much money, but then you're always opening up those side routes, and then you don't have money anymore, so you can't buy it from Mr. Krabs. So I do feel like there's almost an invisible wall in this game where you're going pretty well, and again, it's got a good flow, and then eventually you're hits, and you have to slow down, really start looking for stuff. But, all these locations, like I said, most of them, I feel like are really fun. Jellyfish Fields, of course, kind of an iconic one, and King Jellyfish having that boss fight. Well, I believe maybe is that the only one actually that's not a robotic version of themselves. So there's a lot of really cool areas. There's a lot of really cool enemies. Again, I think fighting is fun. Playing as all of these characters and going to the bus stops, right, to swap them out. Sandy, I feel like it's actually kind of the most unique. Like, she's a blast, and she adds this aerial unit or aerial kind of element to things, that you don't really have beyond her. I love the slides. Any kind of, I don't know if you want to call that on rails, because you're not really, there's oftentimes multiple paths you can go down, and you can do it more than one time. And there's the entire location where it's just a series of races, right? You're beating times, and it's all about going downhill, going on these slides, and then finding those hidden paths to find, whatever the kind of side missions might be, or to find all the spatulas there. That was a lot of fun, because I really like, it's kind of iconic, like SpongeBob with the tongue, sticking on the thing, and that's basically his sliding ability. It's kind of iconic, but it's also, that might be the most fun, because the fighting, I think, is kind of rock solid. I will say the diversity of enemies is actually quite surprisingly good because there's more than I kind of remember. They introduce them kind of piece by piece, right? Like new areas. They'll kind of do that close-up view of them, pull it back, and it's like, okay, there's your new enemy. They have like that police report area that you can go to see all of the different robots and all the different enemy variations. Some really cool stuff. Like the game, I think, it's just a really fun time. I do understand, because I do think it has limitations. I think in terms of putting you in Bikini Bottom, and I think that, again, like, I mean, I was a kid, and so, like, looking at it as an adult and saying, well, why maybe did it kind of break out? Why is this the SpongeBob game that really did it? I feel like it was good enough at so many different areas, right? And then it kind of gave the definitive SpongeBob experience and put you into that world. Because if you think about it, the amount of locations is actually staggering. Like, it's like, what, 10, 11, 12 locations? It's a lot of places, and it's all the places that you would think of. If you have a favorite episode, or you have a favorite season, or you have whatever, I think it captures a lot of SpongeBob really well because it's trying to nail so many different things. And I think that's where it probably does it best, and then it throws the collectathon element on top of it. Just get as many spatulas as possible. The end goal is 75, but and I think kind of an underrated part of it is all these locations, or many of them, they don't really have an end game. I mean, yes, when you go into them, like, they'll oftentimes be that the first mission that you take on, maybe Mrs. Puff is there or whoever is there, Squidward, right? They kind of rotate the characters that you're doing missions for, but you'll find them, they'll say, okay, do this, maybe say rock bottom, right? You have to find the museum pieces. So the entire map you're going to be going through, and now you're going to be earning stuff, you're going to be opening things up, and you're just going to kind of be exploring. But at the end of the day, like, those museum pieces kind of take up, from beginning to end of that map. And then you kind of start where you end, or end where you start, kind of in a big circle, and there you go. But there's no, because the boss fights are actually separate, right? They're in their own kind of unique locations. And it's very possible to beat this game, without getting all the golden spatulas, and kind of almost doing it your own way, especially, I guess, money-wise, because you can really max out Mr. Krabs, and therefore kind of make the last, maybe say the Flying Dutchman area, you might not have to get any spatulas there, period, because you don't need them to get to 75, right? So I really like that kind of element. When it comes to the bosses, by the way, because I keep bringing them up, iconic in their looks, I will say, upon playing it, now 2025, a lot older and maybe hopefully a little bit more wiser. They are they're very light. Now, like, I don't know, maybe that was a sign of the times. Like, we've gotten in recent times kind of a little bit of rebounding, with platformer games. Astrobot, I think, comes to mind, at least like from a PlayStation angle. And I think because of Astro, I'm so used to just, like, the most dynamic things happening of all time. You look at Astrobot, like the one that came out last year, and those bosses, there's like 500 things happening at once, and it all feels so good. You go back to this, there's some. I think Sandy's is honestly probably the best one. SpongeBob is like maybe the biggest one, the final boss, but it's not. I don't think any of them should be considered amazing. King Jelly, like, none of them really are all that good, but I think they're good enough. I think their size is something kind of to look at. I think how they look is pretty special, and I will say, also to kind of close this video, I like the look. Okay, I do like Rehydrate. I like how it looks. I think it works kind of for modern times. 2020, obviously playing it in 2025. There is something very special about how it looks back originally, and I saw some people even online talking about, and this does happen, when you modernize a game and you make it look, say, quote unquote, better, if that's what you want to say, right? Well, say you're modernizing it, you are always probably going to lose. There's like an edge to it, that makes it special originally, and there is a visual flair to Battle for and I think I talked about this even with like Silent Hill 3. I know it's so different from like SpongeBob in this video, but you look at some of those kind of like classic PS2 era games, like say 2000 to 2005, you can even go a little bit higher than that. there's something about that visual style that, I mean, does it get old? Does it look old at times? Yes, but there's something about the artistic style of these things that kind of can never get old. And I think Silent Hill 3 showed that to me just a few weeks ago when I was playing it. And you look at, if you don't have it yourself, I actually don't have the original. I need to get it. I've added it to my list to eventually pick up. I don't have the original Battle for Bikini Bottom, but you look at just how the world looks like, and I mean, I think it's more colorful. They definitely added a little bit more light to it, in this game. But there's something, and I saw people argue that it kind of captures the aesthetic of SpongeBob better originally than Rehydrated does, and I can see that. I will say SpongeBob has kind of moved as a show more towards this new stuff. You look at how Titans of the Tide looks. I think that is actually much more in line with like newer era SpongeBob. That doesn't mean it's better, but it does mean I think it matches what SpongeBob looks like nowadays. But I also get that in the reverse. Battle for Bikini Bottom, that was an era, and that visual style works really well. And yeah, you're adding some lighting and you're adding some colors and you're making things more crisp and clean. But you are, at the same time, you're always, and I would actually argue this with anything, you're always going to lose something. It depends on how much value you as a person puts into it, but you're always going to lose some element of that uniqueness of how it originally looked. But I think it's a solid time. I will say, like, at times I think I was enjoying myself more than I thought I would. At times I was like, yeah, this can get to be a grind. Sometimes the controls don't always work for you. Sometimes they're just so heavy that it kind of feels like a little bit of a slog, especially when you're trying to go place to place and you're doing your cleanup, right? Collectathons have cleanup, right? You have to go back and double take things and say, okay, what did I miss? And the loading screens get in the way there. And then also just the movement of these characters. Like Titans of the Tide, the demo had dodging, so you can move very fluidly and quickly in the new game, it seems like. And this old game, which is, I mean, in that way, it feels like an old game. Oh my God, it feels like you have cement blocks, attached to your feet. All of them. Sandy, I think, I like the aerial, again, like element to her. But unless you're sliding and you're doing like those kind of slide levels, the game is just slow. It's very slow, the movement of these characters. And the more you play it and the more you're collecting and you have to double back and do all this stuff, that does get in the way. I would say that's probably the biggest like negative, I would say, of the entire game, is how slow you move, or the movement system in general. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.